So, starting with Mike.
Hey everyone, great to be here. So I'm Mike. I joined Plug and Play over 8 years ago. I also have an entrepreneurial background with a variety of different startups. And when I joined Plug and Play, we had about 20 employees. Today we have about 750, and we've expanded worldwide. We've invested in about 1,800 startups. Some of the notable ones are like Dropbox, and we actually had the first office space for Google, PayPal. Those are some of the early ones, or like Honey would be an early stage exit we had a few years ago. And we're super excited to invest like very early on, like pre-seed and seed rounds of a lot of different startup companies, and then try to really push them to this huge corporate network that we have. So great to be here.
Great, thanks. Praveen?
Hi, everyone. Praveen Akkiraju. I'm a managing director at Insight Partners. At Insight, I primarily focus on infrastructure investments. So this particular conference is of particular interest given the impact of AI. I have an operational background, ran engineering teams for a long period of time, and then did a startup which essentially got acquired before I moved on to the investing side of things. So from Insight's perspective, we're sort of a growth stage investor upstream of Mike and Tricia here. So primarily Series A and up from a target sort of company perspective. My investments, some of them are Postman, LaunchDarkly, Workato, some early stage ones like LibLab, Bardeen, et cetera.
How's it going, everyone? Tricia Martinez. I'm a managing director at Techstars. We are the largest early stage investor in the world. I personally invest in about 40 companies every year, look at thousands around the world. I'm investing in things that are going to change our world, novel, deep tech. I look a lot at AI, quantum, climate tech, biotech. I've been in AI for over a decade. I am a founder. I built and scaled the fintech across sub-Saharan Africa for about a decade. After that, I went to the White House as a fellow where I worked across the Department of Energy to build an AI and climate strategy. So here to provide a perspective from very early stage investing as well as from a founder.
Thanks, Tricia. Jeff?
Thanks. Yeah, Jeff Dressler from Softbank. Unlike my panelists here, I'm actually on the government affairs side. So I do public policy, regulatory analysis for the companies that we invest in, as well as handle some of our CFIUS, national security, foreign direct investment screening mechanisms. So follow AI pretty closely. As you know, Softbank is a prolific AI investor, one of the largest in the world. And so we run a global government affairs office out of Washington, D.C. And prior to that came from government. I was a national security advisor to Speaker Paul Ryan during his speakership, and then moved to the private sector and joined Softbank after that. So it's been about almost 5 years.
Great, thank you. So I should, in the interest of full disclosure, tell you all that I asked ChatGPT what I should ask the panelists this morning. So I got back a long list of questions, some more relevant than others, and a note from ChatGPT that said, tailoring these questions based on your audience and what you wish to learn will make your engagement with the panel more effective and insightful. So these are my tailored versions and a few lobbed in of my own of ChatGPT's questions. So I thought I'd start with asking you all how you evaluate AI companies. And is it any different to how you would have evaluated companies, say, 5 or 10 years ago before AI became the buzzword? And Mike, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I think a lot of the AI companies are quite similar to like the traditional like B2B SaaS companies, especially the ones that are selling to enterprises. So when it comes to investing, we'll look at kind of similar metrics. But overall, I would say that we're super excited. And I think every startup that Plug and Play is meeting these days has some sort of AI application. So it's definitely a very kind of hot topic and a revolution, I would say, for a lot of startup companies that we're excited about.
Great. Praveen, anything different you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we're further upstream. So I think one thing I'd say is, I think AI has been around for a bit, right? While we're all quite excited about ChatGPT, I think, this is sort of just the next wave of AI technologies. Insight's been investing in AI for a while. I think as Trish mentioned this as well, right? We spent a decade in AI. So I think the way we think about investing in AI is really sort of, because we're further upstream, we are seeing a lot of these companies. We have a portfolio of companies that are already AI, pretty much very well engaged in AI. Companies like Jasper, Run.ai, Weights and Biases, Bardeen, et cetera. So I think given that we're a little bit later stage, we tend to sort of wait to see how these various different ideas kind of start to gain customer traction. So we look at it from a customer perspective, from a end user adoption perspective, some of the metrics there, and obviously, just the technology itself.
Great. Sounds pretty similar. Tricia, what do you think? Anything new that you look for?
Still not working. Okay. So I'm going to be pretty honest, you guys, there's a lot of shit in the market right now. So yes, there's a huge AI craze. And I think most of us have been working in AI for a decade, investing and building in AI. And so we've said all along, this is the future. And now people are jumping in. What's overwhelming from the investor perspective is that there's just so many companies who are pulling AI into whatever they're doing. And as an investor, what we like to look at specifically from Techstars is team first. If we're building AI, I want to start at the infrastructure level. I want to know what you're building is adding real value. You're building the bones of the future of this technology. You're not building on top of ChatGPT and handing over all of your data and your assets to another company. I want to see that you actually have a team of PhDs, people who have degrees, advanced degrees in building advanced algorithms and models. So team is definitely the priority. There's so much noise and chaos in the space right now, which is overwhelming, but you just have to really dig through the teams to understand where the opportunity is, who has their true expertise, and of course, looking at the market and assessing which industries are going to be disrupted the fastest by AI. We can look at biotech, healthcare, climate technology. These things will be using AI as a tool to help disrupt even further.
Tricia, you specifically mentioned PhDs, which is so different to how a couple of guys with an idea for an enterprise SaaS startup, or people dropping, like Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of college to build Facebook. Are PhDs in AI more important than they've been in other companies recently?
Absolutely. I don't want to be biased in how I look at a company, but if I know you're building infrastructure as an AI founder and you don't have an advanced degree, that's a red flag to me. Sure, people can be self-taught, but for a lot of the things that we're looking at in artificial intelligence with deep learning, neuromorphic computing, not anyone on the street can go build that in their garage. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of research and development. A lot of these things are spinning out of the labs. And so it takes years and years of trial and error, and PhDs or a master's or whatever form of advanced degree there is something that is really key for me.
Great. And Jeff, can you talk a little bit about the regulatory environment? When we were talking beforehand, you mentioned that there's going to be a big executive order coming out from the White House tomorrow that'll have implications for investing in AI.
Yeah, thanks for that. So two separate issues. One is sort of the global AI regulatory landscape, which is pretty permissive right now. The U.S., ChatGPT sort of spurred congressional interest in figuring out, there are both opportunities and consequences. So we better start educating ourselves about how to regulate AI. The EU is usually ahead of everybody else, and they are again with the AI Act. Singapore as well, and then China has a different sort of regulatory model for AI. So the AI regulatory landscape is mixed. It's a little bit like crypto, where crypto was a couple of years ago. So I think presents both challenges and opportunities, but it's very permissive. The White House is concerned about the outbound U.S. capital going to fund technologies that are dual use, meaning that they have both a commercial and military application. And so that's really the genesis of this executive order, is to say we don't want investments in certain areas of concern from U.S. investors in some types of AI, mostly limited to military application, chips, so semiconductors, quantum computing. And so we haven't yet seen whether or not this is going to be a prohibition in certain sectors or just a notification requirement. But I think the White House is using this as an opportunity to basically see the full picture and figure out where capital is going.
So what countries would be affected? Let's say you were thinking of a dual use company that you might want to invest in. I guess China would be at top of the list, right? Any others?
China is at the top of the White House list for sure. Russia, of course, the obvious ones like North Korea and Iran, but tend to group those 4 countries when they talk about countries of concern. There are others as well, Cuba, of course, but not a lot of investors are pumping money into Cuba these days. So it's principally focused on China from the White House's perspective.
What does that mean? Does that mean that some startups that might have been based in China will try to move, or the Chinese graduates who are thinking of moving home and starting a company might just stick around here? Will it have that kind of implication?
Sure. I think the implications of this are not yet clear. We've seen other VCs in the space reorganize their structure to try to attempt to deal with this. And then you also have, the Chinese government who is concerned about the type of capital that is investing in sensitive companies in their country. And so in many cases, they're restricting foreign capital that is coming into sensitive sectors for fear of the same thing that the US is worried about. Basically, getting the secret sauce of these companies and then applying it towards some sort of military purpose.
So the White House tomorrow will be saying, you can't make these investments in China, and China will be saying, well, we don't want your money anyway.
It could be. There's no shortage of communication on US-China issues these days.
Just one of the data point on regulation I think is interesting is just looking through the EU's initial sort of take on regulation. There's significant sort of dichotomy in how they view open source, for example. Open source has been sort of the engine that's driven a lot of innovation in the the broader software economy, but also in AI. And the EU regulation right now is problematic. I hope whatever the US comes up with is going to be a little bit more, pragmatic in terms of the way it views the use of open source, because I think that's a really critical ingredient to the overall ecosystem.
Right. And getting back to startups for a minute, what do you see as the biggest mistakes that startups in AI make? Like, Mike, is there some kind of common advice you would give or to startups in this sector?
Yeah, I agree with the comment earlier that everyone's trying to start an AI startup, or it's easy to leverage ChatGPT, for example. But I think what's really important is not only to have like the technical expertise, but to also have like the business and the industry level expertise. Because the big challenge, I think, oftentimes is how do you actually get into these, like, for example, if you're doing enterprise use cases to these large companies and have them successfully pilot and then implement your technology. So I think for a lot of companies, having like industry or kind of experts that can actually get in and then successfully implement the technology, I think that's kind of the biggest challenge, because it's becoming more and more competitive. But I think the startups that are the best at executing are ultimately going to be the most successful.
Right. And Praveen, do you see is there some advice?
I think, for me, AI is just another tool, right? I mean, ultimately, a company is built around solving problems for customers, right? So when you think about a lot of the way founders approach problems, it's always sort of first principles, like what is the value we can deliver? And AI obviously opens a whole new aperture of things that we couldn't deliver before. And in some ways, it makes things more efficient. In some ways, it's a new way of engaging your customer base, right? In some ways, it's a fundamentally brand new business model. But I think it's first principles. You have to understand what problem are you trying to solve, right? And then does AI, is that the right way to solve it? I think to Tricia's point, there's a lot of AI washing that's happening, right? There's a lot of you look at a 15-year-old company already all of a sudden like rebranding itself as an LLM first company. So, you need to, that's why we always, and this comes from my background as well as an operator, it's always customers first, right? You understand what the value to the customer is, and then kind of figure out, okay, how is this particular approach, differentiated, leveraging AI or otherwise, right?
That AI washing you mentioned, it reminds me a lot of the 2000.com boom and how every company was like, oh, we're, .com. And maybe that's a necessary phase that we need to go through, where everybody has to do, like, now every company is an internet company, but no one would start a company and call themselves, Amazon.com today. It would just be assumed, of course, you're an internet company. So eventually we'll get to that stage with AI, right?
I mean, I think it's interesting if you saw the Apple announcements, they hardly mention AI. But AI is inherent, it's built into every single product that they do. For them, it's really about, am I solving a customer's problem? And it's not really about leading AI first. Now, I think they're a consumer company, and so it's different from a business company, but it's a good example, I think.
What do you think, Tricia or Jeff? Either one of you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that most founder-first investors think that way. Like, customer is number one always. And today I would put AI companies in two buckets. There's deep tech AI, which are PhDs, technology that's been spun out of the lab. It's been building for decades plus. And then there are these ChatGPT AI companies. Maybe you don't have a PhD, but you're trying to figure out how to utilize AI and jump on this huge wave. At the end of the day, all that matters is your customer. You need to solve a problem for them. And if you're not, you're screwed and your company is going to fail. What we oftentimes see with deep tech companies is that they have built a technology and they're in search of a problem and a customer. They're searching across so many different verticals and industries, and it's an exceptional team and an exceptional technology, but we just can't crack the code yet or figure it out. I like to think about when building, you have to identify the problem first, because why waste your time and energy? But there's this new interesting world that we live in where technology can be and should be utilized. We invest trillions in R&D around the world, and so much technology just sits on our shelves. And these technologies can actually solve some of our biggest problems that we're up against, like climate change. And so trying to figure out how we can tweak that and apply it to real industry and solve for a customer is really important. But I think the perspective of customer first is top priority. And when you speak to investors, if you are a founder, you have to have that mindset. You have to have empathy of your customer, whether it's a business or a consumer. Understand who they are, what they're thinking about every day, the problems that they're dealing with, because only if you did that will you be able to solve and build and scale efficiently.
So, Jeff, do you think that as the AI era unfolds, the government will approach regulation differently to how they approached regulation at the time the internet was becoming prevalent?
It's a good question. I mean, it always lags behind the development of the technology, right? And I think the challenge with AI is that it just is going to go in so many different directions. And so how do you regulate a living, evolving thing? It's proven difficult. I mean, I go back to Commerce Department was asked to define AI regulations for export controls, and they were given a certain amount of time to do it. And it took a lot longer, and still really not a very clear definition of what counts as AI. So I think even definitional challenges exist in the AI space. So, that's a positive for entrepreneurs and for investors because, you don't have the government telling you what you can and can't do. But the flip side of that, you've seen Sam Altman make some comments to this effect in his testimony that, we actually want some regulation because it gives us a clear idea of where we can go, what's safe and what's not. So, do you spend $100 million developing something, like facial recognition, for instance, that is heavily regulated across the globe? Or do you not do that because the government's going to come in a year from now and tell you, yeah, you can't use that in public spaces. And so it is really a double-edged sword. And I think, it's going to take some time before the Congress and the White House really gets their hands around this and comes forward with a proposal.
If you're a startup, what should you do about that? Not knowing exactly what the future will bring. How should you handle that?
You want to follow developments as closely as you can. That's pretty easy right now, but I think it becomes more complicated, especially if you see your market as global. We talked about the EU AI Act, which is pretty stringent. It's not final yet, but they're working through it. So maybe that poses challenge for you as a founder doing business in Europe. And so you might look at other jurisdictions that are more permissive, like Singapore, for instance, or the Middle East. So it's a very complicated patchwork, and a lot of times founders of small startups don't have time. They can't go hire a head of public policy until later, unless they're doing business with the government, in which case that does make sense. So I do think there's opportunities here as well for companies to try to work with government, as frustrating as it can be, in order to try to get on contract, that sort of thing.
I just wanted to add something. So I think that as a founder, you need to be aware of everything that's happening in DC, just following policy, what's changing, what's updating, just because you need to know to update your investors, how you're going to be able to be nimble, move against certain policies. If technology changes, how can you change? So it's one, you can't regulate yourself because you'll never exist then because you don't have the resources or time. But I also want to call bullshit on, OpenAI. Like, I think they want regulation because they're building a moat. They don't want other companies to be successful and move as them. I don't think they care at all about actually regulating and protecting. Unfortunately, that's what I believe. I think that they're building a moat and they're being smart about it. We can also compare the AI space right now to blockchain before. Like, there was the huge blockchain ICO craze. We didn't regulate, and look at how many people are ending up in prison now because they stole so much money from consumers. We do need regulation, but I also think there are bad actors in the space who are acting greedy right now.
And it's just one other data point. You actually, if you're a founder, you have a sense for where regulation is going to go, right? There's been a set of lessons learned from the whole social media sort of, I guess, evolution, where data privacy, consumer, the way you treat data is a fundamental area of sensitivity. It was not the case when we started off, the revolution over 10, 15 years ago. So, if you're a founder, you that's one area that's obvious. Like, you have to make sure you're very responsible in the way you're leveraging data. That was not the case in the previous generation of startups where, sure, customers' data is fair game, right, in terms of how you use it. So, and I think, I don't know, Jeff's the expert here, but I feel like a lot of the regulation is really going to be centered around the notion of privacy, protecting data. It's also the number one concern for a lot of corporates who are looking to adopt AI, right? The policies around governance and data privacy, I think, are the number one inhibitor today for the large-scale adoption of AI in the enterprise.
Speaking of OpenAI, there's just so much focus right now around large language models to the point where it's just almost crowding out any other kind of idea in AI. What are some other promising areas besides language models, or are those just going to dominate for the next year or two? What do you think?
I think there's different layers. Like, there's the large language models, and then there's the level between the actual customer that may be using the large language models. But I think, just to the point, some of the points earlier regarding like the hype of like blockchain and ICOs, like, I remember those times and all the crazy startups that would come up with $70 million and be like, I don't have a use case. I think this is different. And I think that overall that you really see these tangible benefits today from, like, for example, in customer experience automation. Like, you can see 70 to 80% automation with of tickets, for example, for agents. You can see improved CSAT by leveraging this. Whereas in blockchain and a lot of those technologies, it was kind of like a futuristic belief in this system that maybe will work. But I really think that there's so many tangible use cases when it comes to AI. So that's what really excites me about it.
Good point.
Well, I think on the technology front, again, I will go back to the earlier point, right? AI is a continuum. I did a neural networks course in my grad school, right, way back when. Just that data and compute now make it possible to leverage those algorithms to build interesting stuff. So, this generation of AI was started with the 2017 paper around transformers. And I think you're going to see the math evolve. There's going to be more efficient algorithms. There are already a couple of interesting models, Liquid AI from MIT, something called the hyena hierarchy. AI tends to be very obsessed with animal metaphors for some reason. But it's a very interesting paper which talks about sort of how to make AI algorithms much more effective. The notion is, like, today, it's, inference is so expensive. It's really expensive to take inference and bring it to the edge. So you have to cross that sort of barrier if you're truly going to unlock the capabilities of AI. And so I think the math's going to evolve. There's fundamental things around alignment, fine-tuning, different approaches to do that that's going to evolve. This notion of how do you provide better, privacy and governance, that's going to evolve. Cost is going to evolve. So I think we're at the early stages of this. There's a ton of real interesting use cases that are coming out. But I think also, to Tricia's point, if you're a founder, you better keep your ear to the ground on sort of where this technology is going to evolve, because we're not at an end game of like, okay, transformers and that's it, right? I think there's going to be a lot more ways this technology is going to go forward. And I think if you're a founder, you're probably building an architecture that's going to be flexible enough that can accommodate these things as they come about.
Great. So in a minute, I'm going to open it up to a couple of audience questions. So think about if you've got something you'd like to ask one of the panelists. But in the meantime, you mentioned MIT and this Hyena paper. I know the Transformers paper came out of Google. There seems to be a lot of back and forth between academia and AI in a way that I haven't noticed in other sectors. So founders have these relationships. A lot of companies are building interesting partnerships. What would you say to a startup that wanted to collaborate beyond its startup? Like, how should they go about building those partnerships? I know that's a general. Okay, Trish, it looks like you have something to say.
So, one, I have so many thoughts around the future of AI because I'm obsessed with it. So one, I'll just throw in a quick note. Neuromorphic computing, it is the future of AI. It requires way less energy to train it. It operates on the edge. It mimics the way a brain thinks. That is how we're going to run autonomous vehicles, run a number of our systems in the future. Everyone look it up. It's the future.
Thank you for mentioning that. That was actually one of AI's suggested questions that I asked about and I was like, no, too technical.
Yeah.
But no, clearly
it's
not.
fascinating. It's amazing. So I work as an investor with the 17 national labs across the Department of Energy, as well as a number of universities. So one of my Techstars accelerators is in partnership with Oak Ridge National Lab, the largest national laboratory, as well as University of Tennessee. And so they have lots of technology that sits on the shelves. They want to bring in more technologists, PhDs to take it, commercialize it. So we invest in companies who are building IP with those institutions. And so oftentimes founders think like, is that dirty? Are we sharing IP? Will investors not like that? At the end of the day, there's licensing. You can figure it out. Many deep tech companies operate in this way. If you have the ability to build and scale something that is world changing, 100% it's worth giving up some of the pie to a university or a national lab if they are a great partner. And I would also say that these universities, MIT or even national labs, have a big stamp of approval. A lot of investors recognize the labs. They know who they are and they are impressed and want to see that you have expertise by working with them. So it's definitely a positive thing. There's a way to do it right and a way to do it wrong. So you should definitely do research as you're thinking about potentially building a partnership and conducting research and advancing your technology with those institutions.
So way to do it wrong, being too greedy
So most of the universities are the labs are definitely not profit seeking. They're federally funded, but you could have a relationship as a university spin out where the university owns a lot of the IP and some investors might not be as attracted to it. So you have to have legal representation, make sure that you're working with an IP lawyer who has seen a lot of these contracts. They know how to negotiate to work with those universities. It could be like a first founder mistake. You just don't know how to, vouch for yourself.